Hi everyone and welcome to Isamu Rat Care. So today's video is going to be all about how we can make do in situations where we don't necessarily have everything on hand that we want to, and that's particularly apt at the moment with us going through COVID-19 and a lot of people are facing lockdown or variations on that, so we're not necessarily going to be able to get hold of all the things that we would normally have for the rats or have access to the same services. So this video is going to be looking at a particular element of that, which is how we're going to feed our rats the dry mix, and I'll focus on that component and I'll cover some other bits and pieces as we go along. So when we're thinking about our dry mix in the majority of rats' diets makes up kind of like the bulk of what they eat. We give them other stuff as well, things like fresh food, wet food, vegetables, supplements, treats, but the bulk of their food should normally be a dry mix, and that's where they get like a lot of their nutrients from, and it's something that's quite important because particularly if a large number of rats, you do get through it at some rate. What we're seeing happening already here in the UK is some of the kind of commonly available base mixes are getting quite hard to find, and that's because the places we would normally go are struggling to get the stock themselves, and that's quite natural. But what we need to do to cope in this kind of situation is to kind of understand what we want to achieve with the dry mix. So it's going back to the basics, because that will then help you decide what can substitute certain ingredients or how you can make do effectively. So what I want to talk about this is in kind of three different ranges. So there's going to be like short term, so that's what happens if you'll be able to get hold of something, but you've got to wait, let's say 2 days, 3 days, maybe a week until you get hold of it. And that might just be because you're struggling to get to the shops. You might be showing symptoms, run out of food, and are not going to be able to get out until you kind of past your lockdown period. And that's quite a short period of time, and it's the kind of length of time that your focus when you're kind of feeding your rats should be more about making sure that they've kind of got full stomachs. They're not eating anything too unhealthy, but they're kind of like, they're kept kind of full. You don't have to worry that much about overall diet balance. It does not have to be perfect because it's only for a short period of time. It's as that kind of time builds up, gets longer, that you really have to think about making sure that you're ticking all the boxes and they're getting everything they need. So short term, if you're out of food, basically the best way to start is to see what's in your cupboards. What have you actually got? You might not have everything you need to make your own mix. If you make a mix, you might have stuff in for yourselves. If you're even down, like one of the most straightforward ways of doing it is if you do have access to going outdoors and getting stuff, you're just waiting for a delivery, and let's face it, deliveries are taking a lot longer than they usually do now. Then just feeding something like a straightforward rat muesli, and I would still probably not feed Pets at Home nuggets unless it was a real emergency. But something like Regirat is fine. You can get it from the shops. I wouldn't want to feed it long term, but it's absolutely fine for a few weeks. And there's a new food that we saw at the Bradford Champ show, which is called Little Ones Rat and Mouse Mix, and that's quite good actually. I'd be quite happy feeding that for quite a while, but it's in quite small packages, so you might get through it quite fast, and it's not widely available in pet shops. That kind of thing. And if you can't get like an okay rat food, Science Selective, isn't the end of the world. I would rather not feed a nugget pellet style food to my rats for any long time, but it's perfectly fine for a short period of time. Just give them a bit of kind of like extra food to go with it. If that kind of thing is not an option, a decent rabbit muesli, and I should say muesli, not pellet, and ideally you want one that's not got loads of grass and such in it. Mr. Johnson's, I think it's Supreme. I prefer the special, but you generally have to order that online. But the Supreme is quite often in quite a few pet shops actually around, so it's worth having a look for that. Obviously, if you can get something like Banana Brunch or Mr. Johnson's Special or Dodson Holland's conditioning mix. I think there's a really nice young stock mix. There's various, not just rabbit. There's also horse foods. What you're looking for when you look for a mix like that is you're looking for something that's around the 12 to 14% protein. You can go a little bit lower than that, but you may need to feed them extra protein. You're looking for around about the 5 to 6% fat. What you'll find is a lot of horse mixes, rabbit mixes, etc. Are quite low in fat unless they're a conditioning mix, and they're kind of much higher. So if you do feed those, it's not the end of the world. You just need to give them either some extra oil in the diet, something healthy like olive oil or linseed oil or flax oil, or some extra seeds. and that just helps kind of boost it up. Nothing's perfect out there, but for a short period of time it probably doesn't matter that much. If you're talking about a medium term period of time, 2 to 4 weeks, let's say, kind of your month lockdown, that's where you might think about that a little bit more carefully, but it's not going to make a massive difference in a few days. Other things is look what you've got in your cupboards. So something I've quite often cooked up for my rats when I'm short of food is just some basically cooked rice with a bit of egg beaten through it. So for every about, let's say, 200 grams of cooked rice, I'll stick in an egg, and then I'll just stick it in the microwave for a minute, give it a quick stir around, throw in some vegetables, quite often frozen veg because I nearly always have that in, and then just chuck it in the rat cage, and it's a really nice treat for them. You can add supplements to that, you can add a bit of oil, but that's a very easy, simple meal replacement. If you're cooking some pasta for your tea, give them some cooked pasta, they'll love it. If you give them too much, they'll probably get a bit fat, but for a few days it really doesn't matter. Breakfast cereals, I'd avoid the really high sugar ones, but you know what, it'll be fine. And actually, with rice and pasta and such, it doesn't have to even be cooked. You could give it them dry. That's absolutely fine, despite what some people will tell you. Just wait a sec. The rats are out at the moment. Moomin was trying to go visit the babies. I've got like a nice piece of cardboard trying to stop them so the babies don't get harassed too much. But you were quite good, you managed to jump over it, didn't you? Your little misses. Everybody else is harassing the boys in their cage. But that's fine. You want a piece of food, miss? I got some food for demonstration purposes. Moomin may be pregnant at the moment, so she'll be quite motivated by food. Right. So that's the kind of thing to think about. Anything that we're eating that's healthy, cooked potatoes, etc. Give them a little bit of protein, a little bit of carbs, slightly more of the carbs, and a little bit of kind of veg flavour, etc. Just don't go anything that's too salty, particularly fatty. If it's unhealthy for us, it's best not to give it to them. But for like a single day or two's treat, it's really not the end of the world. They'll probably be quite happy with that. So that's kind of the principles of the short term. Medium term is kind of like I say, 2 to 4 weeks, so it's going on for a bit longer. It's the kind of situation where your usual food isn't around, you still think you might be able to get it, but you've got to spend a bit more time looking for it, and that's one where you need to think a little bit more carefully. And what I would say, if you can, and I'll cover this a little bit more when I do the supplements, in this kind of situation it's always worth making sure you've got plenty of supplements in, because that means that you've got like coverall and a bit of peace of mind. And I will do a separate video on supplements and how you can kind of make do if you can't get access to your normal ones. I nearly always have daily essentials and Calcivet in because that's a really good coverall for me. But if I ran out, I would know what I could do with kind of reasonable stuff that I could get at a kind of supermarket, health food shop, and I will do something on that later on. Right, sorry, I'm just now bribing Moomin to behave, because now she knows how to get to the baby, she will continue to do it. Right, so for this kind of like medium term solution, cooking the rats load of food isn't ideal, and that's because cooked food is generally lower kind of like, it's more processed, so it's kind of packed full of nutrients so they get fatter on it faster. Now, you can do this, you can feed a cooked diet to rats, but you have to reduce the volumes in line with that. And I couldn't tell you exactly how much because it really does depend on the rats. So you have to think about what you're feeding. Longer term, it may be easier to look for something kind of like that you can feed for a decent amount of time. And that can be, you can do things like make your own kind of grain mix. So I've mentioned about some of the kind of rabbit foods, horse foods. There's some good goat foods out there. I think there's a pygmy goat mix that Alan and Paige do that I've used before. That's quite good. When you're picking it, try and pick things that are low phosphorus, just in case you've got oldies, but for around about a month it's not going to have that kind of long-term problem. So if you go for that kind of thing, but what you can also do, which is quite a good option, either in the medium term or the long term, is to think about something like a straight space mix. And when I say that, in an ideal world, rat rations will still be around for those of us in the UK, and we'll be able to get a wide range of straights and a wide range of foods, but at some point that may not happen, and we do need to be aware of options for that. Or it might be that they have to shut down for a period of time, and people run out of food while they're waiting. So a good way to kind of like deal with that. Come on, I'm going to make you come all the way up this time. say hello to the camera. Yes, so a good way to deal with that is this kind of straight-based approach. And when I say that, it's not kind of like a true straight space. A true straight space would be as minimally processed grains as possible. So it would be using things like paddy rice, which is a rice in its shell, and whole barley, and that's what I use as part of my mix. But actually, you can get an awful lot of grains just from your local supermarket. And I will say it's somewhat challenging at the moment. However, I do think that the kind of panic buying approaches that we're seeing here in the UK at the moment will calm down soon, and then there's likely to be access to things like brown rice and pasta and such. So when you're thinking about making your own kind of like straight space mix because you're struggling to get hold of any kind of decent commercially available mixes, you want to think about things like, so rice is an absolute classic one. I would get yourself a decent amount of rice. If you've mostly got young rats, go for brown rice. If you've got old rats, then white rice or a mixture of the two. Pearled barley, so that is kind of effectively whole barley but without the husks on it. So that's a really good grain to use in that kind of situation. And then there's popping corn. So popping corn is perfectly fine for rats to eat. It's some people will say that corn is quite dangerous because you can get kind of fungal mold spores on it and that kind of thing. And in the US, the animal grade stuff is you wouldn't it carries risk with it. I probably wouldn't feed it to my rats unless it's micronized, which is squished and heated, and that kind of dries it in a different way. However, human grade popping corn is dried in a much kind of safer manner, and that is safe kind of around the world really because it's safe for us humans to eat. They take a little bit more care over it, which is not great really when you think about it, but it's the way things are. So that's another grain that you can get hold of quite easily in your local supermarket. And then look at things like your pastas. You don't want to add too much of the pastas because, or you need to feed less if you're adding a lot of it. They're also mostly wheat based. So I would almost, like when you're constructing a mix and you normally have like 50 to 60% base mix, and then you have like 15 to 25% processed grains. What I would be thinking about is combining them into one, because ultimately you're kind of blurring the line a bit between what's processed and not processed at that point. And actually have your base mix and your processed grains as all a mixture of things, and make them as much as you can kind of those more whole grain type things. But then you can be adding your low sugar breakfast cereals, etc., and you'll make a kind of base, and then that'll make up most of your food. And then when you're talking about kind of your veg element, you can either choose to dry your own veg, very easy to do. I've got a video on dehydrating veg. I do use a dehydrator in it, but actually I also talk about how you can do it on window ledge, because ultimately that's what I did for many years before I got the dehydrator, and worked well. But the alternative is you don't have to feed that vegetable mix, you give them fresh veg instead. I'll do a little bit of a video talking about veg and kind of ways that we can get around the fact that maybe not always have loads of fresh veg in. At the moment we're fine for that, but you can understand this happening. But I'll do one of those later on, hopefully this week. It'll depend really on how mad work is. On a plus, I'm working from home from tomorrow, so I might be able to do a little bit more of these. Right, so that's the veg section. We've talked about the kind of base of a typical mix and the processed grains of a typical mix. Usually you should be able to get both. Again, if you're struggling, cooked carbs are fine, and you could end up going more towards a fresh diet, kind of wet diet. It is more difficult to balance, which is why having some supplements on hand really help give you a bit of peace of mind. Protein wise, so dog kibble is generally pretty available. Oh no, the girls have now found where I've hidden the dry mix that I was trying to hide. I've been joined by Snufkin as well as Moomin now. They're both kind of like figured out I've got food here. Snufkin is also possibly pregnant, aren't you, Missy? With this, you can have some even as much as Moomin. Right. So other things on our mix, yeah. So dog kibble is always usually pretty widely available. Where you can, try and go for something that is around about 18 to 25% protein, no more. I also prefer to go for something natural, because it's generally got better quality meat in it, and we don't have to buy a lot for rats. It like goes a long way with rats, because we only have like 5 to 10% in a mix. You can add a little bit of mealworms. They're usually widely available. I wouldn't rely on that solely for your protein source because they're really high fat, but it's one to think about. Seeds wise, for those of us that kind of get the proper rat rations mix, which I must say I do because I'm lazy, But another option if you're kind of making do is to try and get hold of like a bag of linseed from your supermarket. To be fair, I quite happily use that on its own. Pumpkin seeds is a nice addition. But if you're struggling to do that, you know what, it's not the end of the world if you're going to get a bag of a kind of wild bird seed. Ideally one without loads of sunflowers and peanuts in them, but actually, you know, it's not the end of the world. It's just they're not quite as nice kind of fat content for them. But if you're struggling, the rats will be fine on it. And I think that's something to understand. A lot of my videos I talk about kind of like the ideal world situation, and we're not always in the ideal world situation, and actually there's nothing wrong with that. We can sometimes kind of make do and with what we've got, whether that's because of financial problems, because of supply problems, because life's just got on top of us. As long as we're trying to make sure we're hitting the rat's main kind of needs in a diet, then they're going to be okay with that. So that probably covers like most of what we'd put in a typical homemade mix, and that's the way to think about it. Always make sure that the bulk of the food is going to be carbohydrates, whether that's short term, medium term or long term. Try and make sure that if you're in the medium or long term, so over about 2 weeks, more important if it gets over about a month, make sure you're hitting the vitamins. So that's easiest done via supplements, but I've probably got time. I might do the supplements video straight after this because they really go hand in hand. I just don't want it to be too much for anybody to watch when they're already a bit stressed by life. No, sorry, Snufkin found the food again. Yes, so kind of try and make sure you cover those vitamins, and then kind of see what you've got available and make the most from that. And yeah, don't be afraid of doing the odd kind of little bit of experimenting with fresh food. You can replace meals with that if you've got it available to you. Also things like feeding dog food, so like wet dog food and that like that as occasional meal replacements. I've got like a drawer full of it in there, mostly for the kittens because it matters more for the kittens. Yes, I know you're starving. Go and have a grain. That's it. Yeah, so I mostly keep it in for the kittens, but actually it's fine as an occasional meal replacement for the rats as well. But yeah, don't overthink it too much. Don't be too set in your ways as well. If you've always followed like what I've covered in my simple mix, and it's like this is what I use and this and this and this, that is not how I feed in a kind of normal basis. That's how I try and make it simple for people. But actually you can replace ingredients of that very easily as long as you honour the actual purpose of each of those sections. And you're not kind of sticking it full of unhealthy food or beans. Don't use beans. Dried beans bad. Cooked beans fine. As a protein source. I just mentioned that because some people do get confused by that, and that is one that is quite dangerous if it's not done properly. Hey, Wick, what's this? Baby Wick, she's not a baby anymore. Yes, no, you have to take it off me. Yes, there, good girl. Like that. Yeah, so that's really the principles of it. Be flexible. Be prepared to see what you can get. So whilst we still can, it's worth nipping down to kind of animal feed stalls, see what's in locally, see what they stock in terms of kind of horse foods, goat mixes to some extent. They're not normally too bad. Not all horse foods are fine, I should say. There's a really good thread for those of you on Facebook. If you're in the Rat Care UK group, there is a base mix thread where people just share the different base mixes that they use, and there's actually far more than just Mr. Johnson's special Red Mills conditioning mix and Harrison's banana brunch. They're just the ones that I use because they're the ones I've tried recently. So have a look at those because they may help you out. But yeah, don't be afraid of mixing together a load of kind of grains that you get in, or feeding kind of wet if you're really struggling for a period of time. If there's anything specifically that you're struggling with, let me know and I'll see if I can come up with ideas if you let me know what you've got in. But make sure you look after yourself as well as your rats, because your rats need you in good health in order to kind of be healthy themselves. So I think that's it from food for me. I hope it's helpful. I'm aware that I've just splurted a load of information out, which is my normal style to be honest. But hopefully it makes sense and it will help you if you're struggling, and I do encourage other people to share ideas as well, comments on this video, or if you on Facebook or anything like that, feel free to comment with what you do use and what ideas you've used in kind of last minute, because I think that's really helpful. and like what I normally have in might be not what other people normally have in. Like I always have some rice. I discovered I did an inventory recently. I think I have several kilograms of sushi rice. I went through a phase of eating sushi, but clearly went out of it before I stopped buying the sushi rice. So we're fine for rice, it just has to be sushi rice for quite a while. So we'll see how that one goes anyway. But over and out from me, and let's pick the rat that's closest at the moment, and off with Chocobo, who would like to demonstrate that she's still lump free, which is very, very good, because that would be quite stressful at the moment. But yes, so over and out from us, and good luck, and I hope you and the rats eat well.